If we continue without whistleblowers, then we will not have human rights. We will not have a democracy.
I think the role of the whistleblower is now more important than ever before.
I believe that you can't keep silent about something that is requiring your voice. In other words, you need to sign on something, you sign on, regardless of consequences.
From 2001 to 2003, Mike Tshishonga headed the Pretoria office of the Masters Business Unit, a division of the Department of Justice. The unit appoints liquidators to handle bankruptcies involving billions of rand. South Africa's liquidation sector is highly lucrative and also highly corrupt.
My whistleblowing journey started in 2002 when Mr. Maduna, the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs, phoned me and introduced me to his friend, Emva Mutala, who was the liquidator.
Penuel Maduna suggested that Mike meet Mutala for lunch.
The alarm bell started ringing for me when we were at lunch with Mutala, because what I could read between the lines was that he is trying to use the minister's influence to get an advantage over other liquidators.
Mutala wanted the panel that appoints liquidators to be restructured in his favor.
After a week, the minister phoned again. And this time he was furious. From the look of things, it seemed as if he thought after meeting Mutala, I would make changes. So I didn't make any changes.
Maduna summoned Mike to a meeting.
He started by saying that, yes, Mutala has been sidelined.
Mike's colleague Irene Mokhalabone explained to Maduna that Mutala didn't meet the requirements to be appointed as a liquidator in certain liquidations.
In fact, he went to an extent to say that some of the requisitions which Mutala submits are fraudulent.
Mike refused to appoint Mutala, as Maduna had expected him to do.
So we thought the matter has been settled. Mutala's name came up again. And this is in the case of REG, which is a very lucrative liquidation.
The liquidation of REG, or the Retail Apparel Group, was worth over R1 billion. Using Maduna's influence, Mutala had been appointed to REG, but was later disqualified after other liquidators opposed him in court. Maduna intervened again, appointing an official to the REG liquidation who had known links to Mutala.
Mutala was appointed, and he was the lead liquidator. So the lights were really red this time. They were no longer amber.
Nicole Barlow is a medical rep from Boksburg on Johannesburg's East Rand. In March 2005, she embarked on an environmental crusade.
Well, look, basically it started by me driving down Rondebolt Road, noticing that a sign had been erected in the Vlei to say that there was going to be a Sasol fuel filling station on the site. And of course, I remembered it from being an area that we used to play in and catch tadpoles as children. And I just was absolutely dumbfounded as to how somebody had obtained authorization to build, of all things, a fuel filling station in a wetland.
parents, like when they heard about it, they really didn't like the idea of this wetland going now. If they stop building it, where will we go see places like this in 10 years time?
Yeah, it's just like getting less and less all the time. You just check townhouses and shopping centres like popping up everywhere.
You must understand at that point that I knew nothing about environmental legislation. I knew nothing about how you obtained authorization for a fuel filling station or for anything for that matter, but just something struck me. I went back home, got on the phone to Sasol and said, how on earth could you build a petrol station in our wetland? That began a huge campaign. I wrote a letter to the Boksburg Advertiser, got the journalists involved, organised public meetings. I mean, I really wanted to gauge the opinion of other people because I thought to myself, am I really the only one objecting to this? So that started what I've been told is one of the biggest campaigns to highlight an environmental contravention. Because it was in the media so much, the Gauteng Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Environment felt compelled to hold an internal inquiry to find out what had happened. After that, it was discovered that in fact the department had issued a negative record of decision.
This meant that the wetland was considered a sensitive environment and that no development should have taken place. The department known as GDACE got an urgent interdict against the developers to stop further construction. At the same time, GDACE launched an inquiry into the authenticity of the original record of decision.
The previous owner, Mr. Henry Arden Ford of Dealmania, had possibly or allegedly manufactured his own record of decision, making it a positive record of decision. The reasons were the fact that there were other petrol stations within a very close proximity to this one, the fact that the water table actually started 1.2 meters below the surface. They mentioned the fact that the petrol tanks would be submerged 5 meters below, constantly in water, and there were other environmental factors, that it was built in the 1 in 50-year floodline.
But GDACE's inquiry had ground to a halt. Petroprops, the current developers, approached GDACE for a settlement that would allow them to continue construction.
Round about the latter part of 2007 and the beginning of 2008, we started to find out that there was an enormous amount of corruption taking place at GDACE, that there were officials within GDACE that were taking bribes in order to allow developments or developers to continue with their illegal conduct. When we started to realize just how pervasive the corruption was, I mean, at that stage I thought to myself, is it even worth fighting?
In 1997, Dr. Paul Theron was a part-time district surgeon in Cape Town. He was approached by a senior to serve as the doctor for Pollsmoor Prison's medium ace section.
In actual fact, I refused. I said, I didn't want to do that kind of work. And Dr. Aginski, who was the chief district surgeon, then approached me a second time and told me a story which later turned out to be, in fact, fictional. Dr. Kowalski, who was one of our colleagues, had gone to work at Medium A. He'd started, and it was his first day, and on his first day he was surrounded by the HIV positive patients who threatened to bite him. And he apparently then resigned and didn't want to go back to Pollsmoor. And it was only about 3.5 years later that I discovered Dr. Kowalski had never been to Pollsmoor prison, and in fact had committed himself never to go there.
Reluctantly, Paul accepted the position at Pollsmoor. He was disturbed by what he saw.
I discovered, of course, there were terrible problems in the prison with regard to medical care, management of people, just day-to-day, everyday problems about prisoners being people and people needing actual basic facilities and basic care and basic respect as part of the package.
Frustrated with these problems, he began documenting them.
I wrote a report which then, well, I won't say it was a bombshell, but it certainly had some impact, but it took quite a while for that to percolate through. So that was the beginning of my documenting the problems and then trying to follow that through and trying to get to response. And that became the pattern at Medium A really for the rest of my time there.
In August 1998, Medium A became a juvenile prison. Officially, it was meant to house prisoners between the ages of 18 and 21. In reality, there were sometimes children as young as 10 and adults in their mid-30s. Cells designed to hold 18 people regularly housed up to 80. Court cells sometimes held 160 people overnight. There was no control, no discipline, no order, and no attempts at rehabilitation. Under these conditions, diseases like TB became rife.
So what was there was a system which didn't actually understand what was needed, nor did it actually give time or effort or attention to what was needed. And so the prisoners were, in a sense, neglected and therefore abused. The sorts of abuses that I saw and the wrong sort of ways of handling, obviously I was upset by, angry about, and hurt by. Initially, when I was there were 14 staff, and that was enough to do the job. But within a short time of this changeover from the adult sentence prison to the juvenile prison, I was left with, half the nursing staff for twice the amount of problem.
They spread diseases from one to the other, they fight, they injure each other. We've got a concentration camp here with crime being multiplied and concentrated, and this is our problem. You can't solve health problems without attention to the basic health need.
Maduna's pressure on Mike to appoint Muthala had undermined his position in the Justice Department.
It was very difficult for me to put up with such a situation because I was in charge of the masters. And the liquidators were looking up to me to sort out the corruption which was rife in the masters. That being the case, I went to the DG with Irene. And we said to the DG, there is a questionable relationship between Mr. Maduna and Mr. Muthala.
But no action was taken by the Director General. Instead, there was a backlash.
2003 in January, the minister phoned me. He said, you have appointed people who speak bad about me. You didn't help me in reg. Apparently he thought the matter has been finalized because Muthala was already on the panel anyway. So I'm removing you from being a managing director of the Masters of the High Court with immediate effect. So when I wanted to respond, he says, no. I made up my mind. As to where the DG will put you in the department, I don't care.
He is mad, that's all. You're dealing with a mad chap, that's all. He is a beta element whom I removed for total inefficiency from that position. That's what happened.
It was like a betrayal because, there are documents which saying corruption is not tolerated in this department and so on. And when you try to promote that, you are a victim.
Personally, I'm not bothered about Mike Tshishonga. A lousy dunderhead we inherited from our previous Bantu stands and kept afloat all these years.
Mike was given a new job, but with no duties. Over the next few months, he took his allegations to the public protector, but they were ignored. Then he tried the Auditor General.
He said that, yes, we received your complaint against the minister, but we referred your matter to the public protector. I said, oh, God. It's merry-go-round.
Next, he tried the presidency, but a promised meeting with Maduna never materialized. 9 months dragged by.
I waited and waited until October. I planned to go public. But it was a very difficult decision to take. It was risky. And it was, I was exposing myself to be sued. But nevertheless, I said, I can't leave this lying like this. But something significant which happened. A Sunday, I was in church, and a certain lady sat next to me, and she said to me, God says, I must give you this scripture. I will guide you continually, and I will make you strong, and I will protect you. After the church, when I said, but this seems to be a prophecy of what I'm going to do. So it means it's confirmed in the spiritual realm that I'm doing the right thing.
Nicole waited months for the environment authorities to declare the construction of the petrol station unlawful.
Round about the September of 2008, I drove past the petrol station for like the 500th time, and I decided that this matter could not continue. That clearly GDAs were not going to do the right thing, and the general consensus was that if the department was not going to do the right thing, and that was clear at that stage, then we would have to do it.
Nicole had now formed an ECA, the Environment and Conservation Association. ECA took Petroprops to court, and a prolonged legal battle began. In 2006, Petroprops changed tack. They sought an interdict against Nicole personally, attempting to gag her from further protest. She faced bankruptcy and losing her home, but the High Court, invoking the Constitution, found in her favor. In 1999, Paul wrote a report on the poor conditions at Pollsmoor for the Health Department.
Well, the first report led to this visit by the minister. The minister came, the minister asked for a task team. The task team then met and it made its recommendations over several months. And then these recommendations were never implemented.
Paul continued at Pollsmoor, but hamstrung by the system, he couldn't provide the basic medical care that prisoners were entitled to.
Until after some, 5 or 6 years, you realize that unless you said something a bit louder which somebody heard, you were now colluding with the system, which, essentially was denying people their basic medical and health rights as well as their human rights.
Paul's frustration was shared by a colleague, senior Pollsmoor nurse Andre Slenger. Exasperated, they took their case to both Parliament and a High Court judge.
In January 2007, I went to see Judge Erasmus, and he agreed that an inspection was urgently needed, and in fact, they came and inspected in around about March of that year.
Facilitated by Paul, Parliament organized an unofficial visit to Pollsmoor in May 2007.
They then put a notice in the newspaper to indicate what they were doing and what the conditions were in the prison. It was a very small article, but it had a very big effect because correctional services knew they'd been and obviously didn't like that visit because it was unannounced. And they were very alarmed when they came across this article.
Correctional Services launched a witch hunt and suspended Andre Slenger. In support of him, Paul wrote a letter to the Department of Correctional Services.
Well, essentially the letter was indicating that Mr. Slinger had been wrongfully suspended and that the charges against him were trumped up. It was clear I was implying that the minister himself was party to this decision, and I knew that the minister must be party to this decision because such decisions weren't made without his say-so. But the fact that I said it, the fact that it was on paper, that was crossing the line for them. The next thing I knew, I was standing outside the administration building and the minister came up. He didn't actually physically grab me, but he indicated I must come with him. And he was waving this piece of paper, which I took to be this letter. He then took me into a room full of very senior correctional service officials who were all obviously extremely hostile and primed to crush me if possible. And he then announced by phoning, in a completely fake manner, phoning the NPA, that he was charging me with libel. I knew that he had already staged this thing when all the correctional service officials weren't there because they were having tea together. They were there because I was being dragged before this kangaroo court. An article appeared in the paper indicating that the minister was planning to sue me, and then somewhat later the actual summons came from the minister suing me for 500,000 rand for libel.
With pressure on the health ministry from the Minister of Correctional Services, Paul was suspended from his job. The charge? Highlighting Paul's health problems to the Parliamentary Oversight Committee, the very same authorities who oversee prisoner care. He faced a disciplinary hearing.
The disciplinary hearing was really biased and driving me onto the rocks. That's when I looked around for a lawyer. My brother is a labour lawyer, and he advised me to approach this organisation, which turned out to be ODAC.
ODAC, the Open Democracy Advice Centre, represents whistleblowers and advocates for stronger legal protection for them. The main weapon in ODAC's armory is the Protected Disclosures Act, legislation that supports and protects whistleblowers.
I became a whistleblower. Until then, I hadn't really thought of myself that way, but you know, it grew on me.
Using the Protected Disclosures Act as his guide, Mike finally went public about Maduna. He and Irene held a press conference.
So I went public, and then later I was charged for misconduct. 4 charges were preferred against me.
He was also summoned to give evidence in a reg inquiry.
In actual fact, it was Mutala who invited me to be interrogated by the senior counsel. It was just a mess. You know, I was asking myself, but can human beings stoop so low? And in the department, which is supposed to protect the human rights, act this way?
At the same time, Mike's disciplinary hearing was underway.
It took about 6 months. And at the end, he found that I was not guilty. When I went to the DG saying that I need my job back, he said the trust between me and the department is broken down. I felt I was defamed. That was unfair labor practice, apart from settlement, because settlement I was entitled to in terms of the law.
Mike took the Department of Justice to the Labour Court.
The department made it so difficult that I had to repeat the evidence which I adduced in the disciplinary. So again, I had to call the witness to corroborate me. And that is why I don't think I have enough appropriate words to thank Irene, because she was prepared again to be cross-examined. Our evidence was conclusive.
Mike was awarded a year's salary and legal costs. Despite the judgment, the Justice Ministry refused to reinstate him. Instead, they negotiated a payout. Nicole's court battle with Petroprops was heating up.
The matter became quite urgent round about October of 2008, when Petra Props and Dr. Andre du Plessis tried to make their illegal settlement agreement an order of court. Well, the content of the settlement agreement was basically that if Mr. Andre du Plessis did an EMP, did public participation, they would allow him to continue with the construction. We got a tipple from the department. We ran into court that day and we said, right, we are an intervening party. This is an illegal settlement agreement. So the court agreed. Petra Props withdrew the matter and said, we insist now that the Environment and Conservation Association bring their court application ASAP. And within 3 weeks, we had served our notice of motion. Our attorney unfortunately died tragically on the 2nd of November, so we had to get our case postponed till 2010, but we are currently waiting to go to trial. This case is a very big case for both the applicant and the respondents, and I'm obviously hoping that the court sees that the negative ROD is the only valid one, and in that we will get our demolition order. Then I suspect that we have another major battle on our hands, because if we are granted our demolition order, we will have to then serve that on the respondent, which is the owner and the developer of the land, which will be Petra Props. He then does have leave to appeal, and I suspect that Petra Props will use every possible legal avenue open to them to appeal that should they lose. And they're obviously going to try as much as possible to waylay that demolition, as I have no doubt. So they will use any legal parameter they can.
ODAC took Paul's case to the Labour Court in a bid to lift the Correctional Services suspension against him and stop his disciplinary hearing.
Of course, it was a tough 6 months that I spent, in and out of the legal process. And it was very, very difficult because I had wished to go full-time in the prison work. You see, I felt there was something very important that needed to be done, and I didn't see anyone else doing it.
The Labour Court ruled that Paul be allowed to return to work.
The reinstatement came in December of 2007. That reinstatement didn't work. We went the first day and they refused entry. The second day we went and there were the television cameras, and it was a whole sort of bun fight.
You want to stand on the other side of the road?
Please.
But there were 30 to 40 security guards outside the gate. The gates were closed. The two members were there with dogs. It was a whole circus to prevent one person, that's me, from getting into the prison. I realized by the end of the process that I couldn't go back. I couldn't work there again. My life was in danger because, unfortunately, that's the way things are handled by correctional services. No, they could have arranged for me to be stabbed or in some other way taken out. My father was a person of great integrity. In working with him and working with his image in me, I've had to learn to do things according to my own integrity. Knowing that my father had been on Robben Island, I knew that he had been there. I knew he'd made a huge difference. Essentially, he had gone to the island with his two colleagues, Judge Steyn and Judge Corbett. And he'd gone because Judge Steyn was in touch with Nicole, and Nicole had received complaints from the International Red Cross about conditions on the island at that time. And Judge Steyn thinks it was 1973. They went and they flew in from Cape Town with the general from Correctional Services as the sort of chief official and a few others. And then went to look for Mandela and the others who had made complaints. And they found a number of prisoners, they spoke to them, they interviewed them, they got hostile approach from the commandant of the time, who tried to get them to avoid questions, tried to intervene and so on. And when they eventually found Mr. Mandela, he was on the seashore raking up the seaweed, and they had a conversation with him there. And he He confirmed that the abuses that had been reported by the International Red Cross to do with the prisoners had been going on. And he tried to explain to the 3 judges what he felt was going on and what needed to be done. And the commandant kept on interfering and intervening, and my father apparently turned around and said, "Shut up." And he said, "If you talk any more, I will have you removed." So the incident clearly made a huge difference. The commandant was fired and the whole prison situation changed. And I believe that things were set up to eliminate political prisoners, and this intervention had actually stopped that. And it's not inconceivable that Mr. Mandela and a number of the other senior political prisoners had their lives saved by that intervention. It was difficult and it was painful and it was emotional, but I had to say, if I don't let go and move on, then I'm going to be destroyed by this. And so I decided to let go and take the best out of it. After the case closed, around June of 2008, I became very ill. I developed staphylococcal pneumonia and septicemia. I literally became paralyzed and couldn't move, and essentially would have died if Groot Schuur hadn't intervened and treated me.
Still committed to treating Pollsmoor prisoners, Paul is now the district surgeon for Cape Town and Wynberg. He is based at Somerset Hospital.
The toll and the cost on my side was phenomenal.
Yeah, it was a very difficult time in our life, very challenging, very emotional as well, and quite confusing because we didn't know what to expect next. It was very costly, not only in terms of finances, but also emotionally. And I strongly believe it actually cost me my job as well. It was a very good thing for him to do. And I honestly feel if he were to do it again, well, we will be behind him as a family. But the biggest toll was for us having to move house very quickly because we were not feeling very safe. It wasn't easy selling the house quickly at a loss and, just packing the kids up. They were quite angry, the boys. They didn't like the place we moved into. But safety came first.
Barry Sargent is one of South Africa's leading investigative reporters. He has followed Mike's story extensively.
Was it difficult for Mike Tshishonga to go public? It absolutely was. He was up against a mountain of vested interests where there were tens and in fact hundreds of millions of rands worth of fees floating around. And if you look at this, it was like Mike Tshishonga going to a gunfight armed with a pea shooter. He wasn't going to win the fight, but he was prepared to put his neck on the line and to go for the ride, no matter how unpleasant it was.
This is your second year in Cape Town. I was still very emotional, really, when I acknowledge it. It's perhaps easier to pretend that you're a tough doctor who can cope with anything, but it really is emotional. I think that there was a lot of unfairness and betrayal in the process for me, but I think for me the lesson was in terms of the prison itself and the prisoners, that's what they went through on a regular basis.
From a personal perspective, it has cost me enormously. The applicant has now decided that he's going to delve into my personal life. He's made it very clear that he is going to do whatever it takes to win this, even if it means attacking me personally. I've never attacked Petroprops and Mr. du Plessis personally. I have always fought this battle on an even playing field.
Considering the risks at stake, is whistleblowing worth it?
I think in a country like South Africa, whistleblowing is probably one of the most significant and important things that any individual or organisation can ever do.
And how do you blow the whistle?
One must act in good faith. It's not a publicity exercise. It's not a vindictive exercise. It's for the good of all.
Do it in a legal framework and do it properly. Hold in your mind the fact that it is the most important thing you will ever do. Because corruption is going to kill this country. Corruption is killing this country.
So we've got all the details we need now. You've got to be doing it, in a sense, as a righteous move. You can't just whistleblow and hope for protection if, in fact, you're trying to get back at somebody or you're doing it for other reasons.
And how can whistleblowers be further supported?
The Protected Disclosures Act must be strengthened. If the spirit of the people who are applying this is there, then it should be strengthened.
I think maybe organisations like ODAC and FXI could actually play an integral role in publicising the fact that you have the Protected Disclosures Act and you have the sections in NEMA that allow you to whistleblow.
Hello, how are you? Good, pleased to meet you. Nicole, Barlow. Welcome. Oh, thanks. Hi, Nicole.
I certainly don't regret having done this. It's just that if I'd known what was going to be involved, including the illness that followed, I would certainly have said, whoa,
Okay, I read about your case.
If I'd known then what I know now, I might have been a little reluctant to have embarked upon that campaign. But I suppose the old saying, ignorance is bliss. That's probably the best time when you do something is when you're actually not at all aware of what you're about to get yourself into.
I will do it again. I cannot lose my integrity, because if I lose my integrity, I've got nothing. My name is Mike Tshishonga. I'm going to talk to you about the scourge of crime and corruption in our country. I think we are expected to shout, to tell the authorities where this mischief is happening. I think pain actually, it resembles the breaking of the shell, which contains 1, understanding of self, 2, knowledge of the truth, 3, wisdom. This pain I went through can be a reference point that the prospective whistleblowers are not afraid to go through the pain if it's for a noble cause. It's worth going through the pain if it's for the national interest.